So the first requirement for being a university professor is you can work the technology. So we're having second thoughts. I just want to take a very brief moment and welcome all of you to this very special occasion. It's very rare at Rice that we make one of our own a university professor. That brings with it certain privileges, including the ability to teach across the university. But equally important, it's a recognition, a rare recognition of those among us who have contributed at a level both within the university in terms of teaching and research and our ability to think about the world, but also have attained a visibility importance externally to the university and are recognized for the contributions that he or she has made. We currently have 3 active university professors, Professor Tapia, who is here with us today, Professor Rebecca Richards-Cordum, who I did not see here today, and then we have several Emeriti University professors, Neil Lane and Robert Curl. Have I left anybody out of that? I don't think so. So anyway, I wanted to take a moment and officially, on this special occasion we do ask the university professor to give kind of a lecture in honor of their professorship, but it's also for our way to express our appreciation of the achievements and a recognition of really a lifetime of accomplishment. Please join me in congratulating Professor Moshe Vardi on that recognition. And last, I'll say it does come with an additional requirement, which is that you continue to find ways to contribute to the university and our understanding of our world, and that's my segue to Provost Marilyn Miranda.
Good afternoon. So in addition to the fact that we are officially honoring Moshe for being appointed as a university professor, I'm here to announce that Rice is now launching a university-wide initiative focused on the intersection of technology, culture, and society. Sounds like things that our good friend is interested in. The goal of the initiative is to create a permanent intellectual and multidisciplinary locus of activities at Rice dedicated to the descriptive and prescriptive study of a socio-technical system, namely how technology impacts society and culture and how society responds to those impacts. This initiative will engage in research and scholarship, education for both undergraduate and graduate students, and outreach to the broad academic audience as well as to the general public. This initiative has evolved from the creative thinking and extensive campus-wide conversations that Moshe has led. I think all of you would agree that if nothing else, Moshe is persistent. And one of my favorite things about him is he is persistent in calling the university to be better. And I have really learned from and appreciated and feel the university, I personally and the university has grown from the multiple ways that he has pushed us and encouraged us to be better. So I am delighted to be here for Moshe's University Professorship Lecture. I'm delighted to be here to announce our new university initiative on technology, culture, and society, and most delighted of all that Moshe will be leading this important new endeavor for Rice. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Reggie DeRoche. You know you're really super important when there are 3 people introducing you. And so Reggie DeRoche, the Dean of the George R. Brown School of Engineering, will tell you about all of Moshe's many, many wonderful academic and other accomplishments.
Thank you, Marlene. And of course, I can't tell you all of his accomplishments because it would take literally the entire hour. But let me just give you some highlights on some of the things that Moshe has accomplished. And I spent the better part of last night going through your website just because I was just really amazed at all the great and really interesting things you have done. So let me just briefly highlight some of Moshe's accomplishments. So Moshe is the George Distinguished Service Professor in CS and the director of the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology at Rice. He's a recipient of 3 IBM Outstanding Innovative Awards, including and numerous awards from ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, which is one of the key professional societies in computer science, including the Godel Prize, the Kanellakis Prize, the Codd Award, and the Siglock Church Award. He received the Blaise Pascal Medal, the IEEE Computer Society Goody Award, and the EATCS Distinguished Achievements Award, and the Southeastern University's Research Awards Distinguished Scientist Award. Research Association Distinguished Scientist Award. He has authored or co-authored over 600 papers, as well as 2 books. He is a fellow of 7 associations and societies, including AAAS, the American Mathematical Society, the Association for Computing Machinery, the American Association for Artificial Intelligence, the European Association for Theoretical Computing Science, and IEEE, and the Society for the Industrial and Applied Mathematics. He is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and a National Academy of Sciences. He's a member also of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the European Academy of Science and Academia Europaea. He holds 6 honorary doctorates. He has written or been interviewed for hundreds of news articles on topics ranging from the job market of 2045 to self-driving cars could save millions of lives. And I read many of the articles last night. I spent much of my night reading some of the interviews you've done, which have been fascinating. There are a handful of people in every field that are known for transforming their field. There's no doubt Moshe will be known for transforming the computing field when it's all said and done. Finally, when I came here, there were several people I found I can always talk to and get advice from, and certainly Moshe was one of them, although he did most of the talking, as you can imagine.
But you listened well.
And while he is brilliant, he did confide in me this morning that he has difficulty in tying ties, but you seem to have done okay this morning. So please join me in welcoming Moshe to the podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you for President Libron and Provost Miranda and Dean DeRoche. This is the kind of introduction that one says that I wish my parents were here, my father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed it. So in some of the announcement of this talk, the question mark at the end of the title fell off. And the question mark is very, very important, and we will see why. So let's talk a little bit about trust. Anybody has played what's called the trust game? Very often they do it in like corporate get-together, the team building. So you have to stand on some platform, and there's a group of people behind you, and you have to fall backwards. Okay, this is the trust game because you have to trust that these people will be there for you, and they will catch you. And you don't really know for sure because you are falling backwards. It's a somewhat terrifying experience to do that. So this is trust, reliance on integrity, strength, ability, surety, etc. of a person or a thing. So trust is important in a way we don't even appreciate. Wittgenstein argued, Austrian philosopher, one of the prominent philosophers in the 20th century, argued that every game has an unwritten rule. What is the unwritten rule? Follow the rules of the game. And if you write it, you still need another unwritten rule that says follow that rule. And so the rules of the game in game theory usually say they are common knowledge, but in addition, the player must trust that other players are following the rules. Think when you come to a traffic light and there is a green light, you go because you trust that the person that has a red light is going to stop. Democracy only works if there is a set of rules and we trust that all the players are following the rules. And it doesn't take much to see what happens when we lose this trust. It turns out that trust also have a high economic value. Do you trust other players? Because you can think of the economy as another game. And in an article last October in the Financial Times, it says if you look at there are high trust countries, think of Sweden as a high trust country, and there are low trust countries, and Russia, Mexico, and it turns out that if you could increase the level of trust in the economy, then it will be a huge increase in income per capita, because people would trust each other and transaction would go through with much lower friction. Now we may have a crisis of trust because we live in a very technologically driven society, and to trust technology, you're either familiar with the technology. Well, it took us before that 15 minutes just to get this laptop to project the picture. So trusting technology. Or maybe you trust the people who develop the technology, or you trust the company, the organization develop technology, or you trust the industry. But what if the answer is none of the above? None of the above. I don't understand it. I don't know the people. I don't trust the company. I don't trust the industry. So think what's happening today in my own field, cybersecurity. Every week we hear another breach. More personal data has been leaked. Matthew Green, a security researcher, says, I used to trust Google's product. I don't trust them anymore. We'll come back how American democracy has been hacked. I'm a computer scientist. I view the situation with computer security as a failure of our profession. Simply, I don't know any other way to put it. Surveillance is now not there is a phrase, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Surveillance now is not a bug, it's become a feature. Automated decision making is completely opaque. I'll come back to this area. People talk about explainable AI, but it's a term of aspiration. We don't have this as a technical reality. Do we trust the vendors? You may decide that you care about Twitter security policy. Go ahead, try to read it. Long legal documents written for opacity. Many of these companies, surveillance is their business model. And they're hypocritical. Google has this slogan, don't do evil. And then they have been trying to run away from it for years. And then you read about tech executives who pride themselves that their children do not use iPad or iPhones. That's for your children, not for their children. And this is endemic to the industry. And it's not just Moshe Vardi saying so. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, said last year there is a crisis of trust concerning data privacy and cybersecurity. And this crisis of trust is leading to a new phenomenon called the techlash, which is the backlash against a technology company, the techlash. Here is just over a year ago from a column by Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal, and the column was trying to explain why people are in the United States so much crazy about guns, and I think the argument was silly, but it doesn't matter. Hear what she says. Why do people want guns? Because all of the personal financial information got hacked in the latest breach, because our country's real overlords are in Silicon Valley and appear to be moral Martians. I love the phrase, moral Martians, who operate on some weird new postmodern ethical wavelengths. And not a little job in the humanities also. And they will be the one programming the robot that will soon take all the jobs. Wow. A bit later, again in Wall Street Journal, Neil Ferguson, a conservative historian, most alarming was the morphing of cyberspace into Siberia. Very clever. A dark and lawless realm where malevolent actors ranging from Russian trolls and pro-ISIS Twitter users could work with impunity, and so on and so forth. This is my favorite. This is a description of a segment by John Oliver in the Daily Show. He called Facebook a fetid swamp of mistruth and outright lies. Oliver compared Facebook unfavorably to toilets, which make sugar go away. Whereas Facebook retains sugar, disseminates sugar to your acquaintances, and reminds you of sugar from 7 years ago, and so on and so forth. What I'm saying, says Oliver, there is impurity and integrity, there is purity and integrity to toilets that Facebook seriously lacks. Now, let's see if I can get this to work.
But I also think it gets to a kind of criticism in what we might loosely call conservative ink. That the great suspicion of much of the base is that these guys don't really believe in it. And the fact that they're so eager to just because these...
Nope. So this is a segment. Okay. No. Skip it. Nope, not working. See, technology, can you trust it? This is a segment on Fox News by Tucker Carlson, who is actually kind of interesting because on one hand he's very conservative, but on the other hand he kind of breaks the mold. And basically he compares the tech industry to the tobacco industry. How that for a comparison? How would you like to? How should I look? I'm part of that industry. I mean, it's not as if we can talk industry and as if we are somehow separate from it. We are not separate from it. We are here. We send our students there. We get funding from there. I mean, this is one ecosystem, and we are now being compared to the tobacco industry. And while we are celebrating here big data and data science initiative, in the last few years, several books came out about the dark side of big data. I can put several books here. I'll mention one of them, Weapons of Mass Destruction, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy. And I'll give one example of what's happening in the real world with big data. So about a year and a half ago, your school friend, old school friend, John G. Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States of America, is visiting RPI and having a fireside chat with Shirley Ann Jackson. And she asked him, can you foresee a day when smart machines driven with artificial intelligences, will assist with courtroom fact-finding, or more controversially even, with judicial decision-making? And his answer is, it is a day that's here, and it's putting a significant strain on how the judiciary goes about doing things. So already we have machine learning system being deployed in making bail decisions, in making sentencing recommendations, in making recommendation for parole, assessing risk of recidivism, separating children from parents, and so on and so forth. And you can go and find beautiful websites by a company called North Point, Advancing Justice, Embracing Community. Who can be against advancing justice and embracing community? But when you dig deeper into that, which ProPublica did in May 2016, found out that the software, surprise, surprise, is actually biased against blacks. It's biased against blacks because it learned from the data, and this is not a big surprise that there is a historical bias against black in the United States. This reflects from the data. This is what the algorithm will learn. And just recently in the New York Times, article by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Recent justice reforms contain the seeds of a frightening system of incarceration. Again, the issue is the mathematical model appears column-line on the surface, but are based on factors that are not only highly correlated with race and class, but also significantly influenced by pervasive bias in the criminal justice system. In colloquial terms, garbage in, garbage out. And in a more serious assessment, there was recently this year in Science Advances, they actually took the software Compass, and Compass is supposed to do deep analysis using 137 features, but when they subject it to an audit, turns out it does not do much better decision than any person with common sense would do, and analytically it turns out it's what we call simple linear classifier using only 2 features. So the big deal, but when you look into it, it's quite fishy. And in fact, the whole field of AI and machine learning now is coming under criticism. For example, in Science earlier last year, an article about the reproducibility crisis in artificial intelligence. We used to think that this happens only to psychologists, no offense. But it now seems that it's also happening in computer science. So just to take a kind of a thought experiment, imagine that I take my dog, black lab, very cute black lab, Fluffy, and I train Fluffy to assess risk of recidivism. And I'm willing to subject Fluffy to the so-called A/B testing. You know, you train it on one group, then you take it, and Fluffy is actually very good. There must be something about the smell that you can assess recidivism. But Fluffy does not explain. Either Fluffy barks or Fluffy sits down. These are the two modes that Fluffy has. Would you allow Fluffy to make parole decisions? And of course, everybody realized that this is completely ridiculous. Of course, we're not going to allow dog to make parole decisions, but there's not much difference between these black boxes that people produce now by machine learning and Fluffy. It is a black box. It's a big neural net, learns from data. So we seem to have reached in computer science what I would call the Ender's Game moment. How many people here have read Ender's Game? Okay. Spoiler alert for the rest, I'm sorry. But the story in a nutshell is that Ender is a teenage boy, and he and his teams, essentially they think they're playing video games. But what they don't know, they're actually fighting an intergalactic war, and they're winning. And when they finish, at the end, when they realize they have won, they have destroyed a real civilization. And so this kind of, to me, I mean, many of us got into computer science. It was fun. It was like a big puzzle solving. We enjoyed playing games with it. And suddenly we realized this is not a game. This is for real. And we are, technology today is the center of everything. That's what I mean by our Ender's Game moment. And so what do many people look at this crisis and the crisis of trust, and they think, what is the problem here? It's all about ethics. And so here is a New York Times article from about almost a year ago. Ethical dark side, Harvard, Stanford, and others wants to address it. Boston Globe, computer science faces an ethics crisis. New York Times, in October, some think chief ethics officer would help technology companies navigate political and social questions. And just last week, Facebook is offering $7.5 million for an Institute of Ethics in AI in Europe. So ethics, ethics, ethics. Last June, I was at a meeting of the Computing Research Association. It's an association that brings together all research organizations in computer science in North America. And we had a panel on social responsibility. And the question that were posed to the panel were as follows. We live in a world that we have created. Remember, these are computer scientists there. We live in the world that we have created. We can no longer pretend we are making the world a better place, typical Silicon Valley slogan. And the question is, what is our social responsibility as computing professionals? And all the answers were, more ethics, more ethics, more ethics. And I want to be the skeptic in the room. More ethics? This is really the story here? So let me try to question ethics. I don't, this is like advocating, child pornography, but I'm going to question ethics. And so let me use, as an example, another incredibly pervasive technology, the automobile. In some sense, probably even more pervasive than computer. If I have to say, what is the most significant technology of the 20th century, it would be an automobile. So this is the Ford Model T in 1908, and was not the first automobile was about 50 years earlier from Europe, but this is the first mass-produced, mass-consumed automobile. Changed America. And very quickly, people discover one unpleasant thing about automobiles. They kill people. If you run into an automobile, it's not good for your health. So what happened over the 100+ years? So what happened over the 100+ years, there are kind of many ways you can look at this. But the most significant way is this curve, which is death per billion vehicles mile traveled. And the reason that some numbers go up, because population grows, there are more cars, there are more people. But if you look at what is the fatalities per billion miles traveled, you see that this curve has been going down and down and down now for over 100 years. Most recently, it's actually going up. Anybody knows why? DWT, driving while texting. So how did we reduce now over 100 years, how did we reduce fatalities? How did we do it? By whole different measures. We made the crash avoidance, we mirrors, anti-lock brakes, airbags, crosswalk, traffic lights, laws. A whole system has evolved on how we can use cars, but at the same time make them safer. We did not say the solution is ethic training for drivers. What did we do? I call it public policy. We developed policy, how do we like this technology, but it has a dark side. How do we enjoy technology and minimize the dark side of the technology? We didn't say, if you get caught drunk driving, we're going to send you to an ethics boot camp at Rice University. So I'm going to go deep dive now into two examples from technology, where I'm going to say, is it about ethics or is it about public policy? So let's start with the internet. So if you're old enough, you remember the pre-internet days. For example, in the 1980s, there was in California, I did my postdoc at Stanford, there's something called the Well, which kind of the first electronic bulletin board. Usenet, some people remember this Usenet and another bulletin board. But you have to remember where it was developed. It was developed in California, and it comes at the tail end of the 60s with the anti-establishment cultural movement, so-called the hippies. And one of the mantras that came out of that era was, information wants to be free. Why does it want to be free? Of course, information doesn't want anything. It's more, I want information to be free. But this is a beautiful slogan, information wants to be free. And when the World Wide Web was developed in the late 80s, that was the idea. Unfettered public sharing of information. And in the beginning, if you remember those days, it was just exhilarating. Suddenly you have access to information in a way, thing that you were so difficult before that, I used to spend, as a graduate student, I would spend days in the library just flipping pages of journals to see if there is any related article. The concept of online search did not exist. And suddenly we had all this information at our fingertips, except we discover very quickly, there's too much information. We're drowning in information. So we need to find information on the web. So the first solution, there was a company, still exists, I think it was bought by AT&T, Yahoo. Their idea was, libraries have catalogs, we need a catalog for the internet, a directory for the internet. Except that, again, it didn't scale. Information grew faster than you can update your catalog. So people say, no, we need search engines. But search engine can only show you one screen at a time. So the order is incredibly important. And you may remember some of the old search engines, and they stunk. They show you all kind of crazy information. It wasn't what you looked for. You have to go page after page after page. And then Google came with a brilliant algorithm, and suddenly what you wanted was almost always at the top, or maybe definitely in the first page. So we had a technical solution. But Google had a business problem. Remember, information wants to be free. How do you make money? So their solution was advertising. Say, that's, newspapers do it, TV does it, let's do advertising. But very quickly they discovered that generally advertising is not very effective. Most of us, if we see advertisement in the paper, we flip the page. If it's on TV, we fast forward, we go to the bathroom. It's even less effective online. But they had a solution you can only do online. This is called micro-targeted advertising. You show the ads that are specific for you, according to your preferences. How do we know what are your preferences? We have to collect data on you. How much data they collect, we don't even know. We don't even know how much data they collect. For example, we just discovered a few months ago. Google, you think that Google track everything you do online. Not only online. Google goes and get data from MasterCard about all your purchasing, online and offline. So they will know what you're doing. They really want to know everything there is about you. A week ago, I was just really freaked out. I was using my wife's laptop, and I did a search there on Amazon for some product. And the next day, that product showed up as an advertisement on my laptop, on my Facebook page. Wow, I still don't know exactly how they cross-correlate all this information. So the new business model has been called surveillance capitalism, and a big book just came out by Shoshana Zuboff, I think from Harvard. And the slogan is, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product. That's what they do. They sell information about you. And she said the combination of state surveillance and its capitalist counterpart means the digital technology is separating the citizen in all societies into two groups. The watchers, invisible, unknown, unaccountable, and the watched, which is the rest of us. Now, how well has it worked for Google? Very well, thank you very much. This is Google's income from advertising. Probably by now it's about must have cost $100 billion. So this was the advertising business model, was a genius idea. And when you combine it with micro-targeted advertising, advertisers are willing to pay, and Google is making money hands over fist. So now let's imagine now that we go and tell Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who are the two founders of Google, you know, it's a great business model, but it's not exactly ethical. Come and take an ethics bootcamp here at Rice University. And we teach them about whole theory of justice and what have you. Do we expect them to go back and go to the employees, you know what, we got it wrong. We are going to ditch advertising business model. Of course not. It's a corporation. They're making lots of money. They're not going to give it up. In fact, Google has been trying to run for years from their slogan, which they put when they did the IPO, they were young and naive, and the slogan was, don't be evil. And now they have spent years trying to run away from this don't be evil. What do? Can't quite delete it, so you push it down in the bottom of a long document, takes many, many pages to go. And even other people told them, this is Chris Hufnagel from Berkeley, the evil talk not only is an albatross for Google, it obscures the substantial consumer benefits from Google's advertising model. So what are these substantial benefits for consumer? Well, you say, I get all the services for free. So really? Do you really think this is free? If this is free, how does Google make $100 billion a year? Somebody has to pay for it. He said, oh, it's not me. The advertising companies are paying them $100 billion. Really? Where do you think the advertising company makes this $100 billion? They just tack it to the price that you pay on everything. So we pay for this $100 billion, except we do it, it's completely opaque, we have no idea. It's like an invisible tax. We pay this money, come from our pockets at the end, but the result is mass surveillance and opacity. So the standard argument is, well, but people are willing to give this data for these free services. Turns out people actually have very little idea what's really going on. Just a recent Pew survey. 74% of US Facebook users did not know that Facebook maintained a list of the traits and interests. They know that they show them advertisements because they see the advertisement. They have no idea at what level of granularity Facebook is profiling them. When they were shown the data, some of it you can just go deep down into the preferences. You discover how Facebook characterizes you. They're not comfortable with this information. So, for example, I think of myself as a centrist. But when I go to Facebook, Facebook says that I'm very liberal. Now, I don't know who is right, me or Facebook. And you think, well, these are naive users, you know, they deserve it. Okay, how many people here use Gmail? Raise your hand if you use Gmail. Lots of people use Gmail, good. How many people have read from beginning to end the terms of services of Gmail? One guy. Kudos to one person. If you really read it, you will be horrified what you are agreeing to. Every document you send on Gmail, you give Google a license to use it. If you send a paper, you send a paper to your students on Gmail. Google, you have some technology in there. Yes, Google can now use it to improve their services. Yeah, that's the reality. But beyond that, if you think about it, markets are an amazing human invention for value discovery. Okay? What is the value of this microphone? Well, at the end of the day, the value is whatever somebody is willing to pay for it. That's how we determine value. We have prices. It's too expensive here. The quality is not good. That's how we discover value of things. There are all kinds of problems with markets. I'm not here to be a market fundamentalist, but market is an amazing human invention, And essentially, the hippies, so to speak, this attitude, information wants to be free, means we don't have market for information. We don't really know what is the value of information. I wrote last year a column, how the hippies destroyed the internet. And the hippies got very upset at me, became very controversial. And for some reason, this really caught on in Germany. And I had several, I hope you've read also the German interviews. Haben die Hippies das Internet zertrost? So my question to you is it about lack of ethics? Or is it because we don't have the right public policy on privacy and data and ownership of data? So this is one example. Here is another example. Again, all these licenses that nobody ever reads. So here is limitation of liability. So here is from an actual license by some corporation to the extent not prohibited by applicable law. In no event shall XXX be liable for personal injury or any incidental, special, indirect, consequential damages whatsoever, and so on and so on and so forth. Anybody knows who is XXX? Actually, it could be everybody, but this in particular, this is Apple Corporation, okay? They're not responsible. Now, to appreciate this lack of responsibility, I'm going to give you a little legal crash course, and correct me if I'm wrong. There is a concept of strict liability, which is a standard liability which today we typically expect from products. If I drive my car and the tire blows up because there was some defect in manufacturing, then the car manufacturer is liable. Now the negotiation will be exactly how liable they are. There are different degrees of liability all the way to criminal liability. But they're always liable. Why? Because they made it. And this is opposed to older doctrine of caveat emptor. You buy a car, check the tires, check the engine, check the transmission. It's up to you. Today we have strict liability. And in particular, this applies to tangible personal property, which means if the laptop maybe blows up because the battery is bad, then I think they will be liable. They are strictly liable. But if the problem with the software, they're not liable. Now, the concept of strict liability is not new. We can go all the way back to the laws of Hammurabi. Okay? Mesopotamian law from more than 4,000 years ago. If a builder has built a house for a man and has not made his work sound, and a house which he has built has fallen down and so caused the death of the householder, that builder shall be put to death. This is strict liability. Okay? That's how you get strict liability. So the gap between strict liability that we have for most tangible personal product on one hand, and the very loose liability that we can get from computer corporations, from tech companies like this is, I'm not the first one to notice it. This was noticed in an article in 1996, so more than 20 years ago, by Helen Nissenbaum, a philosopher. I think at the time she was at Columbia. And she said this essay warns of eroding accountability in computerized societies. It argued that assumptions about computing and feature of situation in which computers are produced creates barrier to accountability. She said this lack of liability creates lack of accountability. And she has some recommendation and explicit standard of care, strict producer liability, and so on and so forth. And again, my question is it about ethics, or is it about that we don't have the right public policy that updates liability laws from the world of tangible personal products to the world that we live today of technology? So how come we have why is there is no, really very little IT public policy relative to, if you look at on one hand, the role that it plays in the economy and our life on one hand, and how much law actually exists for it, it's very little. And one reason is because this industry today is a huge, powerful industry. I mean, yesterday the market value was $3.6 trillion. About 2 months ago, it was $4.1 trillion. These are enormously powerful corporations, and they have been lobbying now for years against any regulation for IT. And what is the argument always? Regulation stifles innovation. So last year, Elon Musk was being investigated possibly for security violations. That the charges were that some of his tweets were trying to manipulate the stock price. And immediately Wired magazine said the case Elon Musk will chill innovation. So somehow he should get a free ticket for manipulating stock prices because we don't want to chill innovation. That's the argument. But you have to go deeper to a particular, it's not just about their selfish interest, but again, it comes from a culture of what I would call a techno-utopian culture. So John Perry Barlow, who was the founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and passed away just last year, wrote in 1996 a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. So it goes on and on to basically, this is the new realm, the realm of the mind, all your laws should not apply, leave us alone here. But what happened in cyberspace does not stay in cyberspace. We're not talking just even the effect that what, we saw what can happen in cyberspace, but let's imagine, for example, a cyber attack on the US power grid. You think this is fancy? This is a headline from the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago. America's electric grid has a vulnerable back door, and Russia walks through it. So it turns out we have lots of small power operators, and they could not put in place the security that some of the big ones can put in place. So Russia is now practicing on the small operators. What are they going to do with this knowledge? I'll leave it to your imagination. Or let's take another completely hypothetical scenario, an interference in the US election system. Okay? Let's come back to that. So what happened in cyberspace come back to this world. So this idea that somehow we can leave them, these people in cyberspace, we should leave them alone, is just incredibly naive. When you read today this culture, this Declaration of Independence, incredibly naive. But it goes even deeper than that. In 1995, Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School wrote a very influential article about disruptive innovation. And his argument was that it's very hard for entrenched companies to innovate because they are too close to the market. And it takes a new technology, a new player comes in with a new technology that disrupts the old technology. And actually his example was very technical. He looked at disk drives that used to be big. And he showed that as we're getting smaller, every time it required a new company to come in with a new technology, and they would beat out the old technology. He was trying to be descriptive. He was looking in the market and said, this is what I'm seeing. But this descriptive approach became prescriptive. So now disruption is, again, it's a mantra, it's a trope of Silicon Valley. You can see a picture of the conference. Disrupt San Francisco. So it's all about disrupting. Now people are proud to be disrupting. And it's a short distance from disrupting to breaking. For Facebook motto until a few years ago was move fast and break things. Unless you are breaking stuff, you're not moving fast enough. Now, by break what? It's one thing if you break your own internal processes, it's another thing if you're breaking democracy, for example. So now we know that Facebook frictionless sharing enables massive dissemination of fake news, and the argument is getting stronger by the day that this had decisive impact on the 2016 US elections. Of course, there are all kinds of political issues that went into that election, but at the end of the day, you only had to switch a few tens of thousands of votes to determine the outcome, and it looked like there was a successful attempt by Russia to do it. And if you want to read in-depth analysis of that, I encourage you to read this recent book by Kathleen Jamieson, I think from Duke, called Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President, What We Don't, Can't, and Do Know. Now, if you go back to the good old days, there was a concept called corporate social responsibilities. And if you talk to CEO in 1960, they would say, well, I have to balance multiple responsibilities. I have many stakeholders. I have shareholders, I have employees, I have customers, I'm situated in some community. I'm going to try to balance everybody's interests. In some cases, I will forgo profits because I'm socially responsible. That has all been thrown out in the early 1980s, where corporate shareholder value became, again, the dogma on Wall Street, which is that the ultimate measure of company success is the extent to which it enriches shareholders. And the argument here, which is legally dubious, that shareholders are not investors, They are owners. They are the owner of the company. And therefore, they deserve the ultimate loyalty. One outcome of this is that the whole compensation system of corporation has been changed to align the interests of management with the shareholders. And we can see what happened to CEOs' compensation. So we now know that this has been one driver for inequality in this country is rising CEO compensation into the stratosphere. So technology is driving the future, but who is doing the steering? The answer is, it's not us. Right now, the steering is done by tech corporations. So technology has moved very fast. It moved so fast that we have not woken up to the need to create public policy. So just a recent article in Bloomberg, the title is, "Beware of tech companies playing government." This was a reaction to Microsoft decided to invest, I think, $500 million in housing in Seattle. And you might say, okay, Microsoft investing in housing. It sounds like a good thing. But the answer is it Microsoft's role to provide housing for Seattle? Do we want corporation to play that role? So, of course, yes, innovation may stifle some innovation, but innovation is not the goal. Innovation is means for societal progress. And in some cases, we have no problem stifling innovation. There was a proposal for a sex robot brothel here in Houston, and boom, in a week, they passed a new ordinance and they squashed it. Even though I could argue, it's innovation, who knows, it can be a booming industry in Houston. No, nobody wanted it. So let's go back to ethics versus public policy. Is ethics important? Of course ethics is important. Let me quote a colleague of mine, Ben Kuipers, who wrote in a recent article, "Ethics exist to encourage trustworthiness in corporations among members of societies. It is able to do much more than the blunt instrument of the law." Maybe, maybe not. Ethics should clearly inform public policy. For example, we think that selling organs for money is morally repugnant. So we have laws now saying that you're not allowed to, there's no, we have to go around this. When we try to create organ transplant, we cannot sell them for money. And sometimes it's a huge struggle for society to balance the ethical side and the public policy side. Look what we have done with alcohol and prohibition. And now we've done with the drug war, and now we're trying to get away from it. And the bottom line is ethics is about individual responsibility, but public policy is about societal responsibility. So there is a big difference between individual responsibility and societal responsibility. And it looked like, I think, that the golden age from the point of industry, where there was no regulation, I think this is going to change very fast. Just here is now just a bunch of headlines from newspapers just in the last few months. Financial Times, social media platform drawn into regulatory and political net, Guardian, time to regulate Bitcoin, Quartz, EU antitrust chief is setting her sight on Amazon, and in fact, just the last couple of days, they are putting a major fine on Google. Just earlier this month, the Washington Post editorial now, our privacy regime is broken. Congress needs to create new norms for the digital age. Tim Cook, in a recent op-ed in Time magazine, we all deserve control over our digital life. That's why we must rein in the data brokers. Because you think that Facebook has data on you. You have no idea what Facebook does with this data. There's a whole market out there, companies that buy data on you. You have no idea. It's completely black, opaque. We don't know what's going on. And at least he said we must rein in the data brokers, all the people, all these companies that buy and sell data about you. Now, regulation is not a panacea. Regulation is difficult. How to do regulate well? There is an ongoing fight between them. Here is a recent exchange. David French from the National Review, a conservative publication. There are wounds that public policy cannot heal. Ross Douthat from New York Times. He's a conservative columnist for New York Times. Yes, but it can also become a trap, an excuse for doing nothing. And are different different. In the US, we tend to be technology specific. In Europe, more look at the social impact, the societal impact of technology to decide how to regulate it. And what about international treaties? When it comes to cybersecurity, we probably need to do something like we did with pirates. We need international treaties because the attackers can be in different countries. And there is the elephant in the room is, the big question, is big tech too big? A recent article by Tim Wu, New York Times, be afraid of economic bigness. be very afraid. So people very often ask me when I give this talk, okay, so tell us how should I regulate Facebook data and speech? And these are the hardest, regulating speech is the hardest question. And we don't have to start in the hardest question, because I think there are some low-hanging fruits. For example, when you buy today a mutual fund, you get a prospectus. And on page 1 or 2, you're going to find a paragraph in simple language describing this investment. And this is called simple language plain language requirement, which is an SEC requirement. We could expect every license, every term of services to be accompanied by a plain language paragraph. Anybody familiar with Creative Commons licenses? There is a big legal document that I bet you've never read. You read the plain language description. I think using automated decision system in the judicial system with no regulation, I think it's just a scandal. I think it's just a scandal that will let corporations come in and walk into our judicial system with no serious societal discussion about it. We can have a law that requires companies to disclose data breaches quickly. It took Yahoo had lost, I think, data about 1.5 billion users, and it took them more than a year before they disclosed it. We can require internet companies to provide ad-free subscription option. Suppose that you can use Facebook, I don't know, I'm making up a number, $5 a month, no advertising, no surveillance. I'll go for it. Not everyone, but to me, I'll go for it. And if you do the calculation, probably they can have could be another business model based on subscription. But the transition is very difficult. People now, once people get used to free, they don't want to pay. And I want to go back to some of the patron saints of computing. One is Leibniz, who invented the binary notation. So therefore, he invented the bit, the 0-1, which is the basis, very natural basis of digital computing. And he described this idea, what he called calculus ratiocinator, a reasoning calculus. And he said mankind will then possess a new instrument that will enhance the capabilities of the mind to a far greater extent than optical instruments strengthen the eyes. It's not going to replace us, it's going to help us. Ada Lovelace, who worked with Charles Babbage, and he wanted to build an analytical engine and get rich. And she said, yeah, that's okay. But she says, I wish to aid my mind towards expounding and interpreting the Almighty, His laws and works for the most effective use of mankind. She wants this technology to be used for the benefits of mankind. But benefiting from technology is not easy, because technology always comes with a cost. And this is a very, very old story. Our earliest technology is the fire. Now they think that we've started discovering used fire but million years ago. Okay? Anybody recognizes this? Who is this guy? Prometheus. So this is Prometheus, who allegedly stole the fire from the gods. But the gods had their revenge, right? And it sent us Pandora. And Pandora came with a box. And when the box opened, all kind of bad things came out of the box. So this is, in some sense, it's already the Greeks were telling us that technology always come up with negative consequences. And we have to learn to navigate this treacherous boundary between the benefits of technology and the adverse effects. Just recently, this is a picture of Camp Fire. So this is the worst fire probably in the United States in our history. And what was it caused? It's a combination of two things. One is global warming, more dry material to burn, and the trigger was sparks from the PG&E transformers. So we're paying the price today. So Prometheus gave us the fire, and we still have people dying from fire. And to navigate this treacherous line, I think is a great responsibility. So here is, let me read you a quote I call it the great task. It is your duty to participate in the great task of modern time, to solve on the basis of justice and righteousness the problems presented by the contrasts and evils of the present organization of society. Anybody knows where it comes from? You have no chance. The 1885 Pittsburgh Platform for Reform Judaism. But I think it's a wonderful paragraph, and I think it will be a great part of the mission of Rice University. This is our public responsibility. And towards that public responsibility, we're launching this new initiative on technology, culture, and society to study how technology impacts society and culture, study how society should respond to such impact, engage in research and scholarship, education, and outreach. And we already have an advisory board across the university. If you're here, please stand up.
Now, Newt, I want to move on to a really troubling development, speaking of anti-constitutional norms. And
Let's thank them all.
With that, we'll open up for questions. We have a question here.
even if it didn't
So I never asked the first question, but two people asked me today, since you were speaking,
You should ask
would
the
I
first
play the role of Moshe Vardi?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that's what I'm doing today, and I kind of want to ask you.
Poetic
question.
justice.
I thought you might actually be getting, as I was listening, I thought the final recommendation was that we get a law school, but I'll put that aside for now. So one way to reframe this, I say this a little cautiously with Ed Jurigian sitting next to me, but public policy is a kind of squishy concept. And one way to reframe it is there are three basic ways through history we've regulated human behavior. One is through morality, and a lot of that was in the form of religion. A second term you used a lot is regulation, and the third is markets. And I think if you look at them, they all suffer from a range of pathologies, I would say. And so you've very much identified some shortcomings of markets that are fairly well known. I think assumed a certain kind of failure of morality, particularly in modern society. And so that leaves regulation, which at least seemed to be a very big part of what you've described as public policy. Now, regulation requires that we have an institution, we pass laws, and yet we're living in a society in which we are identifying that itself as a failure. It suffers the problems of democracy, certain kinds of corruption, but it isn't even just corruption. There are just certain sort of endemic problems to democracy and sort of the problems in the science of choice. And so we see this not just in areas of technology. We see problems of voter suppression, for example, even apart from regulation. Lately, we've seen in the pharmaceutical industry where prices are increased 10,000%, for example. So my question after all that, and I do have a question, is really what gives you a kind of optimism, in a way, about what you call public policy, and I would call regulation, that looking around the world as you've gotten frustrated in some sense with the way the markets work and don't think morality is a sufficient basis to rely on, why, given all the evidence, are you so optimistic about getting to the point that we have the right regulation to do this?
So one is, I don't know that I said I'm optimistic. But deeper than that, we need to have an interplay of all these things. And right now, I think if you look at it, usually a stool needs to have 3 legs to be stable. And you fidget, and you say one leg is too short, and you make it longer than the other one. It's an eternal, it never stabilizes in some sense. But we have let one leg, I claim, to become way too short. And the discussion, what should be in the realms of individual decision-making, ethics and morality? What should be the law? What should we leave the market? And what kind of market? People make a mistake to argue the market as if the market is given to us like quantum mechanics. It's not. The market is a human institution. It has evolved over many, many years. We have to discuss, the issue of antitrust, and do the old laws apply, or should we make new laws? All of this should be discussed. And so the question to me is not that we just have, that we are optimistic or pessimistic about regulation. We need to figure out how do we combine the markets, regulation, public policy, and ethics and morality.
Hello. Great talk. I really, I think you've said some things that we all need to ruminate on. So I'm a grad student in the computer science department, not a regulator, not a legislator, not in a position of power.
No, you are a computer science student. You have a lot of power.
Well, not yet in any public policy sense. So I guess my question to you is, what should we be trying to do? If there's a big change that needs to come about as grad students, what should we be looking at, in your opinion?
So there has been an interesting ethical awakening in Silicon Valley. So suddenly people realize that they are working at the center of the universe with tremendous power. And you can see that people are, first of all, they start complaining about how Google handles sexual harassment, which I think is a very good thing. Then they decided they don't want Google to deal with the military. And on this, I think opinions are more mixed. Should we debate it? But in my opinion, all of this is partly a psychological mechanism of suppression, not to ask, do we like the job that we are having now? And we might see that, for example, if you're going to end up getting your degree and going to industry, you might have you might have decisions to make. Where do you want to work? So a few years ago, one of my graduate students finished his PhD and decided he's going to go to industry. And I said, well, and he said he was debating between Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And I said, well, of course, your decision, I'm just want to, personally, I would be much happier if you went to Silicon Valley rather than to Wall Street. Now I'm not so sure. And so not all companies behave this way. And partly what I'm trying to do is to raise your social conscience. So you may have to think, if you go out to the industry, what company do I want to work with? I can't see you going to Facebook and tell them, no, I want to work for you, but I disapprove how you do it. That's not going to work in a typical American corporation. Even though some of these corporations have very vigorous internal bulletin boards, and in some sense, there is a worry that the management is losing control. But you have a decision to make. Where do you want to work? And what kind of business model do you want to support? That's your decision.
I graduated from Rice in 1978 with a degree in chemical engineering. And back then, it was before a lot of the environmental laws, before, the EPA, and before a lot of attitudes that we take for granted about the environment right now. And to me, all the history between then and now is kind of an example for what might happen here. All your environmental laws, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, those kinds of laws, and how the states implemented their own version and the rules of how the state laws were subservient to the federal laws, and how the environment crosses state lines. To me, all of that has an analog in what you're thinking about, or how you might envision public policy. So I'm just making a comment, and maybe you could react to it.
So how many people here would comfortably drive in a car that does not have seat belts and airbags? Raise your hand if you're completely comfortable with losing these two protective measures. Okay. The brave ones, okay? The cowboys. We forget these were huge fights. This was regulation. We basically said you have to have them. Or I think the federal government gave incentive. The state had to pass measures, and the federal government essentially bribed the states, offered them some incentives to pass legislation to adopt these measures. I just heard this morning on NPR, the MPG, miles per gallon, when the government started to put these MPG standards. And the industry said first, it is scientifically impossible. And then they came up to negotiation with a counter proposal on a sheet of paper. And I forget now which administration this has been, but this is in the 60s. And the negotiator took the piece of paper, folded it into a paper plane, and tossed it out. And they had to put in MPG requirement. Now, regulation is hard. There are fights. The industry doesn't always want to do it. There are big fights. You can over-regulate. But if you look today, all you have to do is go in air and go see pictures from the 60s, what New York air looked like, and compare it to today. Yeah, absolutely.
So one question here, and one more. If you have a question, you have to raise your hand to receive. First of all, thanks for the talk today. So it seems to me that in the last couple of years, Europe is kind of ahead of the United States in terms of passing like regulations of the kind you're describing. How do you feel that those European regulations are doing? Is that the kind of thing you're describing? Do you think it's sufficient, or is that sort of, do you see problems there?
I don't think we're doing serious regulation. I mean, I think what happened is this year, the combination of Trump being elected, the discovery that the Russians were manipulating the electorate, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, there were just enough things that were happening, including the CEO of Google coming to the Congress and asking, why do they, when I do image search on the word idiot, why do I get a picture of Trump? And so all of this is now raising awareness. And, you know, people are starting to talk about regulations. And we will see, I think, you know, partly we have at this point a somewhat dysfunctional political system where we are debating non-issues, making non-issue into big issues. So I don't know whether I'm going to be optimistic, but at least we have seen now a conversation is starting. And you see people from the industry, like Tim Cook is saying, we need to regulate data broker. So will we see regulation coming this year? This is something that there might be bipartisan agreement to have some form of regulation. We will see. Time will tell.
Last question over there, Woodville.
Is this on? Okay. It strikes me that central to the question of the data, whose data is whose, is if you define one's personal data as their personal property, then we have a whole raft of laws that would protect one's theft of personal property. Now, it may require some additional law in addition to it, but this could turn the whole argument on its head, because now it puts the stress on those who acquire the personal property without the direct permission of the property owner. I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
Well, the problem is that you need to think of data in a richer way. Okay, what is data? So there is one is what we call personal identifying data, really data about me, my family, things like that. We really think of it as personal property. But how about, I like this picture, this cute doggy. I like this doggy. I click like. Whose data is it now? Is it my data? Did I give it to Facebook? Okay? I mean, we actually, it turns out that when you dig into the concept of free will, which is that we have agency of our own decision, we actually have very little understanding of how we make decisions. When you reveal so much information about our preferences, it means that somebody can get a picture about us way better than I said. Maybe Facebook knows better my political leaning than I think of myself. And it opens a road for manipulation by advertising, by fake news, by real news of selected appropriately. And I think that saying, you know, it's my data and therefore I own it, I don't know that it's enough. I think we're dealing with a much more complex situation right now.
Please, with that, please join me in thanking Moshe Vardi for a fantastic lecture. We apologize for the technology. Please join us for our reception.